Getting started. In this lecture, I just want to simply go over getting you started with downloading Visual Studio, creating of your first project, and going over a little overview of the editor itself. So in this course, we'll be using Visual Studio as our main editor for writing C# code. You can download Visual Studio for free at visualstudio.com. This is the page that's going to come up when you load it, and you simply just want to go to the free developer tools right in the home page and click download. This is going to download their new edition of Visual Studio called Visual Studio Community Edition. So it could have slight differences compared to my Visual Studio, but for the most part, it will be the same. So once you download Visual Studio, you can go ahead and launch it, and you're going to see something like this pop up right away. Instead of saying Ultimate 2013, yours is going to say Community Edition 2013 probably. So to get started, when we go to File on the top left, this is how we create a new project. You're going to go to File, New, and you're going to click New Project. Now, this is going to pop up, and there's going to be all different project templates that you can use to create your projects. Now, throughout the whole course, we'll be using console applications. Maybe at the end, we might touch into some basic graphical design, but for the most part, we'll be using console applications. And now, the reason why we're going to use a console application is that the console application is easy to learn. There's only a couple things you need to learn about it, and by learning those couple things, you can make full-blown applications and really learn all the complicated topics of programming without having to waste time with learning graphical programming, because that could be confusing for new programmers, and it's just a waste of time. We're here to learn the basics and the fundamentals of programming, not the fundamentals of building a nice looking application. So that could be later on, but for now, we'll be building console applications. It's just basically a black box that you can type text into. So you could type text and read text from. That's all the really the console does, but that's the reason why we're going to be using it. So once you have the console application, you can give it a name, whatever you call it, pick a location, and then hit OK. So that will create your basic console application. Now, let's just quickly go over some of the editor. So immediately in the center, it's going to load program.cs. .cs stands for C#. This is our main program source file that we'll be using to write code until we get more advanced and we'll make new files. So this is the main editor where you'll type your code in. On the right-hand side, we have a Solution Explorer. This is where all our source files and projects for our current solution live. So we only have one project called Console Application 1, and all our files will be under that node. So this is where we can navigate to all our files and things like that. Now, I'm not displaying mine, so if yours doesn't display it either, there's an error list. So if I go to View and then Error List, yours can now come up, and then you can pin it to your screen if you want to or not. So error list will be here. You can pin it if you want. And basically, error list will display if you have errors. So if I type in gibberish right now, I should get an error. And as you can see, my errors start appearing in my error list. So errors will be useful to keep track of, to make sure your program is working and running well. Because if you have errors in your program, you cannot run it. So if I try to hit start and run this, it's going to give me an error saying I can't run it. So for now, I'm going to close the error list. Now, so let's take a look at the actual editor window itself. So on the top, you're going to see these using statements, then a namespace, a class, and then this main thing. So let me just explain it a little bit. So basically, you see these curly braces. Curly braces in programming is basically organization, you can think of for now. So what it means is that these curly braces are attached to this namespace, and everything that's inside of those curly braces are a part of that namespace. So the orange set of curly braces right here, the orange set, is for the namespace. That means that this class is in the namespace. Now the class itself has another set of curly braces. Now everything inside of those curly braces are part of the class. So this right here is a part of the class, and then this main has another set of curly braces. That means that anything inside of those curly braces is a part of main. So it's a way to organize your code for now. We have at the top these using statements. This is basically there so that we can use code that is written for us by Microsoft themselves. Basically, these are namespaces as you can see, we have our namespace right here. These are other namespaces that Microsoft has written for us, and by using them, we can basically use the stuff that lives inside of them easy. So the class, this is class program. This is basically the name of our main class for now. We'll be talking about classes a lot more in the future, so don't worry about that. What I really want to point out is this main method right here. Main basically is the execution point or the start point of your program. When you run your program, your code is going to start executing from main. So think of main as the entry point into your application. So in the beginning stages of our application, we're going to be writing all our code inside of main. So we'll put our code inside of these curly braces right here. And that just tells it that we want that code to run immediately. Right when the program starts, it will start running the code there. So that's why we're going to put all our code starting in the next lecture inside those curly braces inside of main. As you'll see in the next lecture also, to run our program, we can either hit Control F5 or we can go to Debug and click Start Without Debugging. We're going to be doing Start Without Debugging for a while, and I'll explain that in the future why we do that. The last thing I want to talk about is just comments. Throughout the lectures, I'll be using commenting, and I just want you to understand it so that you don't get confused when you see it for the first time. Comments are basically text that you could put inside next to your code that basically just describes what the code is doing. Commenting is good that you can tell other programmers what this piece of code does so that it's easy for them to understand. So there are two ways to comment code. The first is a double slash. So slash slash, it turns green. Now I can start typing in text. The text that is green means that the compiler is ignoring it. The compiler is ignoring it. And I'll explain what a compiler is in just 1 second. So the compiler is ignoring it, meaning that this is not actual programming code. If I hit enter and then do it, as you can see, now I'm going to get an error because it's trying to run this actually as code. So the double slash means that this is a comment. This is just for explanatory text. So I can say, this does something, blah, 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 blah. So it's just for explaining stuff. The second way to do a comment is multi-line comment. And the way you do that is by doing a backslash star or a slash star, and you can enter and then a star slash. Like makes a group. So now on these lines I can write comments, and it keeps on growing and growing. So this is like a multi-line comment. Also, if you have a bunch of code that you want to comment down at once, if you look on the top of your toolbar, you'll see this comment and uncomment buttons. So I can click on this class and maybe highlight this whole thing. I can hit the comment button, and bam, the whole thing gets commented automatically. If I want to uncomment it, I can just hit the uncomment and it goes back to how it was. So comment just makes your code, or whatever you want to type, ignored by the compiler. So it just becomes text, just random text that you could put into the editor also. So the last thing, for real, what I want to talk about is the compiler. So basically how a program works is we write the source code, which is basically English. We write this code into the editor, and the computer, as you know, can only understand binary. Computers only understand ones and zeros. So our words that we write, our English that we write as code, cannot be interpreted. It's not understood by the computer itself. So it needs to be converted into basically ones and zeros, what the computer can understand. So what happens is when we run our program, it compiles our program into machine code. Well, this is not exactly true, and I'll explain what I mean in a second. But essentially, it converts it into something that the computer can understand. So when your code gets compiled, that means that it's getting converted into something the computer can actually understand, because it can't understand our high-level, basically English words. It gets converted into low-level stuff that we can't understand really, but the computer can. And eventually, it gets all the way down to ones and zeros, logically, ones and zeros that the computer can understand. So now let me talk about this a little bit more in detail. In C#, C# is unlike other languages like C++. For example, C++, when you write code in C++ and hit the compile button, it instantly gets compiled into machine code. It goes right down to machine code, and it becomes an exe file, and you can run that. So that's the lowest level type of executable code. However, in C# it's a little bit different. When you compile in C#, it goes into an intermediate language. So it goes into this intermediate language called Microsoft Intermediate Language. and it sits in that intermediate language until the program is ran. So you compile your exe into an intermediate language. The code in the exe is intermediate. When you actually run the program, it's not until then it gets compiled into the machine code ones and zeros. So there's a compiler called the just-in-time compiler, and basically it gets just-in-time compiled just before you want to use it, and then it gets compiled right on the spot, and then the ones and zeros. Then your code gets converted into ones and zeros right there. So when I go to rebuild, this is compiling it into an intermediate language. And then when I run it, it gets converted into the ones and zeros. Unlike in C++, it goes right into the ones and zeros the moment you hit compile for C++. So that's basically an intro into compilers in the just-in-time compiler. We'll probably be talking about that throughout the rest of the course, but that's just an intro. So when I, in the course, say compile it, that basically means run it, because when you run it, it automatically compiles it first. Or anytime you want, you can go and hit rebuild or build, and that will compile it also. So that's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, we'll be taking a look at variables, what this whole thing about data is, and how we create variables.